Hi, I'm Robin-Yann Storm, and I'm here to present finding and exploiting UX details in game development tools. First, I'll give a little bit of a background information on what I've worked on and what it is that I do. So I used to work at 2 indie studios in the Netherlands as a level designer, 3D artist, texture artist, sort of, etc., like whatever you needed to do to get things done. And I co-owned an indie company where I worked as a game and level designer. Then I became a freelance tool designer, and I worked on level editing tools for Unity in the asset store. Then I became a full-time tool designer at IO Interactive, where I worked on Hitman, Hitman Season 1 and Hitman 2. And then I was a tool designer at Guerrilla, where I worked on the Horizon Zero Dawn DLC. I'm now on the Thank you. I'm now on the road to something new that I can't quite talk about yet. Now, through my time as a level designer, game designer, 3D artist, I had to use many different tools. And I noticed that those tools don't always exactly fit your needs. I felt something had to be done about tools, but not just by pumping more features into them. That's just a lot of work. As UX designers, we know that simplicity and clarity is very important. Instead, my idea was to look at the design of tools, to become a tools designer. So what does tool design entail? It's a relatively new field that currently has no officially decided on nomenclature. When I started out, tool designer wasn't a title yet at the companies that I joined. It usually isn't an existing title, but something studios are opening up to. Some people who do this job are tool designers, others like me, others are UX designers, some are UX UI designers, some are product specialists or product managers, sometimes some are system designers or tools QA or tools researcher or workflow designer. It's like all kinds of stuff. In the end, though, the goal for tool design for all these jobs, in this case, is improving game development tools to lower production time, improve content quality, make sure that whatever you're suggesting, what's being implemented, isn't really difficult to implement into the tools. And of course, saving energy, like saving energy of the people who are using the tools. While tool design in video games is relatively new, these aspirations to make tools better aren't new at all. This is a slide from a GTC 2010 talk by Jim Brown, a senior designer at Epic. He's in the room here right now. So 8 years later, he's still interested in it. It's great. So saving 2.4 minutes a day times 100 employees times 4 hours a day times 20 hours a week is 1 year of your time on a project. If you make very tiny iterations and improvements for a lot of people, you save a lot of time. So these improvements help a lot when it comes to time spent. But like I said before, that's not the only improvement we aspire to. There's also making it easier to make better content, making sure we don't suggest anything crazy. And we also always have to look at the cost versus the benefit. And insert the mandatory XKCD comic, because of course there's an XKCD comic about this. So how long can you work on making a routine task more efficient before you're spending more time than you actually save? So how often you do the task versus how much time you shave off. And you can make a simple calculation of like, hey, should we make this improvement? So it's often, yeah, how often a task is done versus how much time is spent. So tool design is improving those kinds of things. Like what are the truly important things? And lastly, there's also saving energy. If developers run out of energy, they get fatigued. So fatigue happens when one of these runs out. Physical energy, mental energy, or what I like to call psychological energy. So physical energy basically means like you become uncomfortable, you want to lie down, it's too much. Mental energy runs out if you have to deal with so many things at the same time, and you sort of like lose creativity. There's just too much to take in. If you remove some of those mental hoops, it can help regain that creativity. And psychological energy. If you continually have to, for example, like start and restart an editor or an engine to see anything that you've changed, you're slowly going to go crazy. Like, sure, you can do the work, but it's just going to drive you nuts. It's kind of like your Wi-Fi constantly dropping out. Like, yeah, you can still load web pages, but it's going to annoy the hell out of you. Your creativity is going to be gone. So to grab an example of a small and annoying thing, we can look at the Skyrim Creation Kit. The Creation Kit is made for RPGs, which means there's a huge amount of variables, text and assets all to tweak. This means going through many different menus. And to save what is in the menu, you have to click OK. If you don't click OK, whatever you've done in that menu is removed. So you'll lose that work. So let's take a look at some of the menus in the Creation Kit and where those buttons are. So in the Quest menu, it's down and to the right. It's kind of usual where you would expect that button to be in Windows. It kind of makes sense. Another menu, the Actor menu. Now it's in the bottom left. So once you're used to one menu, you now have to switch to another menu. You might misclick it. Now one more menu. Why is the OK button suddenly all the way up there? One, it'll be really hard to click on that. And second, it's right next to the X button. You're going to misclick it, and you're going to lose all your work. And developers could lose a lot of work through this, expensive work. You can have senior principal people losing work over this. And it's just button placement. That's all it is. Now, of course, not that the Creation Kit is the only editor that has this problem. We've all recognized these problems in all kinds of editors and engines all over. So yeah, learning how to make the better game development tools for in-house use is super useful. We can solve these problems. But it's no longer really for in-house use all the time. The Creation Kit is a public tool that anyone who owns the game has this editor. And the same goes for a lot of other games. Arma 3, Doom with its snap map, GA Align's track creator, Yakuza 0's track creator, Halo Forge, the list goes on. Now, all those goals I just mentioned that are great for developers also roll over into gamer and user territory. Nowadays, user-generated content, UGC, is a big part of the industry. And we see that games are using tools to create content that is extending the lifetime for those games. The Steam Workshop, for many games, is a big avenue for new content, keeping players engaged for a longer time. And like I mentioned before, the Creation Kit and Source, those are internal tools that the developers use themselves and are just opened up to the public, to anyone who owns the game. So in this case, improving the internal tools carries dividends that are off the scale if we follow that Phillips effect we saw before. How many users are we saving time here? So these improvements are important. They carry a lot of dividends for improvements in many areas, but it's a relatively new field, so it's probably very difficult or really new and stuff like that. Not exactly. We can apply existing UX methodologies to all of this stuff. Things such as expert reviews, where we sit down with a senior or principal developers and find out how are you using this and why. Field studies, where we just sit behind someone and find out, hey, how are they using this? What are they actually doing? Usability testing, just finding out, does this work well? User personas of what does an artist do with this tool? What does a designer do with this tool? What does a producer do with their producing tools? And A/B testing, seeing which tool is better if we would make one of these. And interviews to find out just as much as we can from as many people as possible. And focus groups to get a very few, very highly informed people to talk about a particular tool they use a lot. And just general research, find out what is out there in the world. How could we do this? What are other people doing? And finding out, of course, what they say they do versus what they actually do. If you talk to developers about what they're doing, they might not actually be telling you what kind of problems they're actually having, because they've used them for 10, 15 years now, and they're just kind of used to all the problems. So, et cetera, regular UX methods work fine when doing tool design. So let's take a look at a real-world example. Now, we could look at redesigning the entire interface of a game development tool like 3ds Max, for example, but that would take a lot of time, and I have 30 minutes here. So instead, let's take a look at a very small use case, at how deep one tiny detail, one tiny tool of a gigantic package can go. Let's look at something that I worked on at IO Interactive for Hitman, which can probably apply to any game out there. And that's the Translate Gizmo, or manipulator if you like that better. Is just one small part of a gigantic DCC package. So how do we start? We want to improve the manipulator. What do? Step 1, we go by people's desks. We take a pen and notepad and we sit down with people. We interview them, we do field studies, we try to find out what developers do and what they say to do. And one thing I noticed while doing that was this. It can be hard to grab the correct gizmo axis when working in certain camera angles. So here we can grab the z-axis, the blue arrow, really easily, but the y-axis, the green one, we'd have to point or move our camera around to actually grab it. It's a little bit confusing. Now, no developer told me this was a problem. They've been working with these tools for years. They're just kind of used to it. But by applying UX principles, field studies, interviews, we see there's an unresolved issue here that we can solve. So what is the actual problem here that we're trying to solve? Well, the problem is that, one, we have something that is annoying and frustrating to use, which lowers energy. If you constantly have to move the camera around, that's annoying. 2, it costs production time because people have to constantly work around this problem. If you place things all the time as an artist, that's a big chunk of your day constantly using that gizmo. And also, content quality suffers. Sometimes you might just be so annoyed looking at something from an angle that you're like, no, I'm not going to place this correctly. Just leave it where it is. I don't want to deal with this thing. So now content quality is being lowered. And of course, we have to keep in mind, we don't want to design anything that's super difficult to implement to solve this issue. So what's step 2 then? Research. What are other tools doing? What features do gizmos have in like Maya? Did anyone else solve this problem or make it like easier to grab a certain axis at a certain angle? Let's take a look. So today we'll take a look at Unreal, Unity, Maya, 3ds Max, Blender, and CryEngine. These are DCC packages that are used all over the world by millions of people. So what kind of features do these editors have? Like what kind of details do they have in it? What can we learn from them? Now, we're not just going to look at what directly can solve our problem here. We're going to have to look at what they have to offer. Because we may be surprised at what actually comes in to be useful later on. So going through this, what we can find is 14 different features for just the Translate Gizmo, and just these 5 editors. And these are just the ones I can cover today. There's even more out there. Now, that's a lot to take in at once, so I'm going to go through them one by one to see, can these features save us time and do anything and raise our content quality? So 1, XYZ Arrows. Yep, it's totally basics. It makes sense to have. Everyone has it. Yeah, no big deal. But it's still good to check out, like, is nobody doing this in like a new or super interesting way? Second, 2-axis planes. So you can grab something and move it over 2 axes at the same time. Again, this makes sense, feels kind of basic. But Blender doesn't have this. I'm not quite sure why. Because in Blender instead, you don't have 2-axis planes. If you click on an arrow, you just move it in 1 axis. But you have to like hold Shift and then click the arrow, and then drag it, and then you can move something over 2 axes. Now, this is not intuitive. Like, I'm not sure why this is built this way, because as a user, you wouldn't know. The only way I figure this out is by going, why can't I do this, and Googling it. So it's just missing this thing, and the question is why, considering everyone else is doing it this way. Then, a center orb or cube. So you can move things relative to the camera by clicking on the center orb or cube. This is super useful for art directors, especially if they're looking at like a cutscene through a specific camera and they want to move something relative to that camera. It's very useful. They can frame things better. It can also be useful to move or snap something in any direction. Now, Unity doesn't have this on by default. And again, I'm not sure why. Like, you have to press Shift first to see it. So yeah, you just have this gizmo in Unity. You can click all these 2 axes, but there's no center axis. You'll have to hold Shift, and then this cube appears, and then you can move something. Again, the same question is like, why is this hidden behind a modifier key? Maybe there's really good reasons behind it. Like, is it so that the 2-axis planes are easier to grab, so there's nothing in the middle? Do users have trouble grabbing them? Is that why they removed that? Couldn't the 2-axis planes be further out so it can facilitate something in the center? There's a lot to think about here. Like, why is this tool different? Because in the end, for this specific feature in Unity, it costs more time to use it, which could make it that negative Phillips effect. Or it could make it easier to grab those 2-axis planes, making it a positive Phillips effect. Which one it is depends on your users at their desks actually having trouble either way. So you have to find out, does this actually work? Resizable. So a resizable gizmo is something that Maya, 3ds Max, Blender, and CryEngine allow. This can be really useful for high resolutions. If people work with 4K screens, something can get very small. So making it bigger is very, very useful. Again, this isn't solving the problem we're specifically looking at right now, but we're learning something here. We're finding details we might be able to exploit later. Resizing parts, so it's something that Maya and Blender allow, like resizing the parts of the gizmo. Now, at first, I wasn't sure why this existed. Like, if you can make the whole gizmo bigger, isn't that like enough already? But actually, there's a point to be made that this is useful for accessibility. Like, if it's hard for you to see the gizmo, it might be better to like make the entire gizmo parts bigger. So it could be useful. Camera relativity. So in Unreal, you have this really cool thing where if you hold a modifier key and drag the gizmo, your camera moves with it as you're moving the object. This is really, really useful if you have like a lot of objects you need to work with, but also if you need to move something over a long distance. So instead of like moving all the way out with your camera and then moving the object and moving back in again, you just do everything in one fell swoop. That can save a bunch of time if you're working with really big levels. Duplicate dragging. So in Unreal, Maya, and 3ds Max have this feature where you can duplicate and drag something at the same time. Hold a modifier key, move something, and the object is already there when you're moving it. Now, duplicating and dragging takes 2 actions usually. You duplicate it, and then you drag it. But if you have this drag duplicate thing, it takes 1 action. So depending on how often this happens, like if you need to duplicate a lot, for example, when you have a lot of like modular assets, this can save like half your time just by having this particular feature. That's a lot of Phillips effect. Now, Unity and Blender and CryEngine do not have this feature. Again, the question is like, why? Is this like not a problem for them? Do they have different processes? There might be. Per Object Gizmo. So 3ds Max has this feature where you have a gizmo for each object you have selected. Now, at first I wasn't sure, like, why is this a thing? Why would you need this? But then I showed it to an artist who also animated, and suddenly there was a use case. It's potentially very useful for animators who want to see the local rotations of all the bones they have selected in a rig, so you can quickly see all the rotations. So again, this particular feature not useful for us, but could be useful in the future. Axis locking. So Maya and Blender have this cool feature where you can lock an axis, so that if you snap anything, it only snaps over the axis you have locked. It's going to be very useful to quickly move things around if you're working a lot with grid spaces. Now, 3ds Max also allows for this, but you have to go through some menus and some options and like drop down, there's a couple of tabs, and then you can turn it on somewhere. That's still a little bit of a negative Phillips effect, as it's more difficult to find and to activate and to actually use. Gestured movement, something that Maya has, which I think is really cool. If you hold Shift in the middle mouse button and drag, you can move an object without touching the gizmo. So you can move something off screen or move something from off screen into the screen just by using Shift and the middle mouse button. So this could be super useful, like the positive Phillips effect here, when you're editing a lot of like hard or impossible to grab geometry can be very useful. Infinite axis, something that Blender allows is like, if you click and drag an axis, you see an infinite line of where that object will go. So before you have to drag the thing all the way over, you already know, like, oh, it's going to go way over there and it's going to hit that thing. That's pretty useful if you're working with like really large and dense situations. Precision mode. So if you click and drag on an axis in Blender, if you don't hold Shift, you move something at a much slower pace. So instead of having to like move your mouse at like centimeter increment level to move something like perfectly fine, just hold Shift and move it regular. Like it's a lot easier on the hand. It's just an easier thing to do, much more gentle. Translation metrics, something that CryEngine allows. So if you move something, you see the units of how much you're moving it, and you're seeing it right where you're looking. But there's a problem here, which is that doesn't show if you're using a 2-axis plane. So if I use a 2-axis plane here, I don't see the metrics anymore, which I think is a bit of like a shame, because I think it's super useful for like the single axis. Why is it not on 2-axis planes? And also, it's a kind of a really cool basic UX feature here. It's shown right where we're looking, so we see it exactly where we are working. We don't have to look at like some other part of the menu or some bar somewhere. And then 14, flipping axis, something Unity sort of allows. So we see here that the 2-axis planes are flipping depending on where the camera is. So they're always easy to grab no matter which way you're looking at it. This doesn't entirely solve the original problem, but it did give me a very good idea. So what did we learn by going through this list and looking through all these things? Well, we learned we can have many different features, even for one small tool, depending on how hard we look at it. There's a lot of UX in there. And those features can be very useful. Also, I'm sure that there are some mistakes in this list. Like, I'm almost 100% sure there are some mistakes, because there's some features you have to toggle on or off and some menus somewhere that I couldn't find. And I scoured the Blender and CryEngine manuals online for as many features as I could, but there's probably something that I missed. And that's, again, still part of this Phillips effect of like, how hard is it to find something? And also, I want to clarify after seeing all of this. I'm not saying, hey, just copy all these features. It'll make everything totally better. No, to look at what your users are doing and how they're doing it and find out what you can do with this inspiration. Like Guerrilla, for example, is a Maya shop. So when I designed tools there, I tried to make them compatible with Maya, giving them the same hotkeys and things like that. So if someone switched between the editor and Maya, they can quickly switch between them. They don't have to like lose their muscle memory. So what's the result? How do we solve the original problem? What was the idea? Well, if we have this gizmo like this, and then we move the other way around, and the 2-axis planes flip towards us, it makes them easier to grab. But if we look at it from the side, it's still not that easy to grab. Like, what if the red arrow, the x-axis arrow, was pointing at us right here? We could grab each arrow, each axis really simply. So what about that? Like, we just like flip the gizmo depending on how we look at it, so it's always easy to grab. Okay, that's a good idea. Should we just go and do that? No, hold on. We got to iterate on the design. There's more necessary here. Like, we need to take a look at like directions of the arrows, and if the color and outlines of the gizmos are clear, and if the double-axis planes are easy to grab, and do we allow turning off this feature? Like, does anyone really never want this gizmo to flip? Let's take a look at this. And let's not spend time programming any solutions right away. We don't want to have programmers immediately spending like valuable time on this. Let's just mock things up in Photoshop. So directions of arrows, what do we do with that? Well, initially the gizmo looks like this. If like, we flip the axes, then it's a negative direction. How do we show that it is a negative direction? Do we like make it into boxes? Like, yeah, it's super clear. We know something has changed to the gizmo here, but this looks like a scale gizmo. This is not what we're looking for. It's going to be confusing. What if we flip the arrows? This could work, but it looks a little bit confusing because now where do you grab the gizmo? Usually you're like used to like grabbing them at the ends, at the arrowheads. Now you might accidentally grab one of the two-axis planes. It's not as intuitive. So what if we place the arrows all the way at the back? I mean, yeah, this could work, but something feels off. Like the outline is very similar. So in an instant, you may still think it's actually in a positive direction. So what if we just like draw the lines out further? Well, this looks just like an overdesign of the problem. Now it's just look noisy and big, and it's not very nice. Also, the infinite line thing we saw in Blender could be useful for this purpose anyway, so you can see exactly where it's going. So we can fall back on that in the future if necessary. Let's not go this way. Instead, what we did is like we make the arrowheads hollow. So in that case, in a blink of an eye, you can see what it is. It still retains the outline, and we can actually like quickly grab things and move it as we would be used to with a regular gizmo. We also add a little bit of text and a minus symbol to really quickly show you, yes, this is definitely in a negative direction. Great, now what else? Color and outline. Is this thing still visible in all these different backgrounds that we have in video games? Like, if we have this gizmo in all kinds of locations in games, is it still easily visible? Do we need to improve anything, especially if it flips? Will that make it too confusing to look at? So what if the gizmo looks a little bit like an outline or something like that? Okay, sure, it becomes more visible, but this is not pretty and a little bit overwhelming. Well, I make it red maybe, and then maybe a little bit translucent. Sure, yeah, okay, this looks a little bit better. We can now probably find it in any kind of environment because there's a stroke around it. Great. But there's an issue here with this idea. Someone needs to make a screen effect and a shader. And suddenly we're like getting other teams involved, such as a render team or an effects team, into something that should just be like a simple tools fix. So we shelved this idea. Sure, it's a good idea, and if there's ever a problem with visibility, we can jump back on it. But it's crossing our like not difficult to implement rule. It should just still be easy and simple to implement. Double axis planes grabbing in size. Is there anything we need to change about these double axis planes? Do we need to make them bigger or easier to grab? Turns out, after doing some field research and talking to users, yeah, it's totally fine actually. If we have to flip the axis and axis planes, it will be just fine. So no changes are necessary here at all. Now that may seem weird to mention, but finding out what we do not need to do is just as important as finding out what we do need to do. Because if anyone asks, if anyone's wondering, we have it covered. We know there's nothing more to get out of this line of inquiry. And lastly, turning it off. I bumped into this when doing some focus group discussions on this feature before it was implemented. Like, is there anyone who particularly does not ever want this feature? Turns out, yes, there is, but who? Programmers who focus on math. They're extremely used to only seeing positive directions. And when programming gameplay features, for example, they see what direction something is going into using the gizmo as a pointer. They never touch and grab the gizmo to move it. They only see the outline of it. So they don't ever want it to flip because then it confuses them. Okay, so we add an option in to turn the feature off. And if possible, we make sure that for all artists and designers, this feature is automatically on. For any gameplay programmers, it's automatically turned off. So what's the final result here? This. All the arrows flip depending on the camera location. So you can now always easily grab the gizmo and move things around no matter where you're looking at it from. And this is just one tiny feature. Like this took us about took me 3 days of on and off research and 2 days of on and off implementation, and we were done just a week. But it helped users a lot. It made them very happy because it was such a daily thing they were doing. That ROI we got out of this was really, really great. So they used this gizmo so much. So going through all this, what did we learn? What are the takeaways here? Well, tool design is a worthwhile thing depending on what you plan to do. Not only for in-house use, but also for UGC tools. This can help a lot of people. And research as wide as possible. Find out as much as you can. Compare other tools, other studios' tools. Compare and contact people inside the studio. Has anyone worked with tools that you didn't know about or has worked on other tools that you didn't know about? And build and iterate fast, sit together with a designer and a user, maybe even a programmer, and just go in Photoshop, line some things out. How could we make this work in a good way for these people? And small UX features can have big impacts. Find them and utilize them. Have someone in a role to more often like bump into these things if this is a key part of fixing that. And if that sounds like too much work for you to take on, hire a tool designer to do it for you. They have the time to look into these things and fixing these things, just as much as we with UX design and game development. Thank you very much. That's my contact info. Thank you. And also thanks to these great people for feedback and help with the talk. Are there any questions? No questions? Was it really that clear? Oh, it is. Awesome. Great. Oh, yes. And if you don't want to come up to a mic, that's fine too. Just hit me up later. I'd love to talk about this, so it's totally fine.
So I appreciated your CNC analysis for all of those game design tools. Which one or ones do you think are your favorite to use?
Oof. So that very much depends on what it is you want to do. Like for example, if you're looking at like just like gray box, white boxing out a level really, really quickly, like the Source One's hammer is still incredibly fast. You can really quickly line up all kinds of things and geometry. But the moment you want to put like props into it or make it look nice with lighting, you got to compile for 30 minutes, which is terrible. Like that's going to cut a lot into your quality. Well, with Unreal, you put a light in, you instantly see what it looks like. So it's really, really great. So it very much depends on like what it is you want to do, what works well for you. Depending on what it is you need, you need to use a different tool. Just like with carpentry or anything else, you need to use the tool that's fit for what you want to do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And so what does your team use?
Sorry?
What does your team use?
So I've worked on well, two things. Like I've worked on Horizon Zero Dawn, Frozen Wilds, and Hitman, and both of those games are open world games. Like they both have like a big spaces. But for Hitman, you have an open space to about to a little bit. With Horizon, you have a gigantic world. So for example, if we're looking at like terrain tools, for example, in Hitman, do you need like really awesome terrain tools? No, you have like a tiny space. Like they need to be good enough, but not amazing. For like Horizon, where you have gigantic vistas of mountains everywhere, yeah, you better have really good terrain tools. Otherwise, it's not going to look as good. So yeah, kind of like, yeah, it depends on what the studio needs.
Cool, thank you.
All right. Oh, sorry, yes, go for it.
Hey, thanks for the talk. That was great. I have a bit of a question that comes up, I feel, very often when people do sort of an analysis of internal tools, specifically within game dev. And it's a bit of the impossible question to figure out once you've done basically studies of how people work with tools, once you've got basically your backlog of everything that's kind of sort of broken and needs improvement. The thing that I hear continuously people coming back is that they don't know where to start. What is your take on that? How do you prioritize the workload after you've gone in and you've done interviews, after having done this a few times? How do you basically start saying, you know, this is what we're going to fix first, and this is basically how we're going to overhaul the whole thing, or do you do it piecemeal?
It depends again on the situation, but whenever I join a studio, the first thing I try to do is I try to talk to everyone, and I literally mean everyone. Like I mean all the way from just the internal level designers that just got in, all the way up to just like the CEO of the company to find out what is the thing that you really, really want and really need.
But how do you prioritize that list of like a million things that you're going to get back from talking to everyone?
By finding out what is the actual thing we want right now. Like if, for example, marketing tells us like, hey, we won like a lot of art awards, but we never win any design awards. Do we want to change that? If so, what does that mean that we need to change? Does it mean we need to change our level design tools? Is there some kind of new Excel system that we can help with design that really helps that out? It depends on what the studio wants and what the studio needs. Like if I see, for example, there are like 500 bugs and tickets in Jira about collision issues, there's probably somewhere a problem with like a collision tool that makes it really hard to place things or debug things. So by really trying to find out what are the big things that are really important to the studio right now. And that's diverse depending on what people want and what's actually happening. Does that answer the question?
Somewhat.
Okay, cool. We can talk more later. Yes?
Hi, thanks for the presentation. It was really good. Actually, I feel like somehow the question is a little bit similar to the previous one.
Sure.
The story from our company is we recently had all the managers get together and have those like offsite stuff to really see, okay, what can we do better next time? So one feedback I find is very interesting is about the tools. Like people don't tend to talk about it because they are so used to it.
Yeah.
Like you already talked about that point during your presentation. So I'm curious about what is your solution to figure out, like even though, for example, you mentioned you talk to everyone, but sometimes I find out, like even though I talk to them, they still tend not to share that. Doesn't mean they don't want to share it, it's just, I'm not really in that mode, so okay, I don't really know how to say it, so yeah.
So my suggestion for that is to hire a person to specifically have the time to do that. Like if you're a level designer or an artist having problems with a particular tool, you have deadlines. You got to finish your things. Like you don't have time to like write up documents or talk to a lot of people about how this is an issue. And when you're a tools programmer, same thing. You have deadlines. You have things to finish. You don't have that time. If you hire a person who doesn't have those two responsibilities, whose specific job is to find out what is going on and why and how, what can we fix, that person can really find those issues and really find those problems and find solutions to fix them. Like I said, it's really similar to hiring a UX person in your team to make the game UX better. Like you need that person to do that. Like you just don't have enough time if you're doing multiple jobs. All right, thank you very much.